Welcome to Fides Podcast. My name is Jerry Cirino, and I'm your host. Thanks for listening. Fides is Latin for faith and truth, and that's what we do on this show, is talk about truth, and talk about faith. Thanks for being here. The great song that you're hearing in the background is my friend Frank Camp. You could find him on Spotify. Great song. This song is called Heaven Can Wait. But thanks for being here, and let's get right to it. Okay, and welcome to another edition of Fides Podcast. My name is Jerry Cirino, and I'm your host, and I'm here with talent on loan from Rush. My guest today is Sergeant Mike McGrew. Sergeant McGrew is a 31-year career veteran law enforcement officer. He's the founder of 911 at Ease International, a former major crimes detective, an author of a book called A Higher Call to Duty, a former hostage negotiator, and former president of the Police Officers Association. Sergeant McGrew, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jerry, for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. So you've done a lot of really great things in your career to give you some really great experience. And if we start off kind of what your background has caused you to do in starting the 911 at Ease International for first responders and helping them through the challenges of their job, because it is a very challenging job. Tell us about that organization and what you do and how you help.
Sure. I was a police officer for the city of Santa Barbara for 31 years. I retired about 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And when I came on to the profession 35 years ago, the culture for law enforcement and first responders was set up in a way that there were a lot of Vietnam veterans that were the senior officers, and I feel like they paid the price in post-traumatic stress injuries, but they were the leaders. They were the people that you were looking up to. Mm-hmm. And they would tell you, hey, this is a tough job. You're getting a paycheck, but just do your best and suck it up as you go. It's going to be rough. And so you do, you go out there and you do a job that is very difficult. It's a job that has a lot of trauma that gets layered up on a person. And eventually it does take its toll. Trauma is something that really, it's an injury. It's something that can be treated. It's something that people can get help for. And when I came on the department back then, it was also something that people didn't support it. They thought there was a stigma attached to seeking out and getting help and for the things that we were suffering. And so that kept a lot of first responders from getting help. One of the biggest things that would happen is if you did want to reach out, maybe access an employee assistance program, you would have to contact your boss. And for law enforcement in particular, that's a really big deal. Because you could subject yourself to a fitness for duty hearing and lose your badge and your gun for a while they checked into you to see if you were okay. And so a lot of people did not reach out because of that very reason. Mm-hmm. Insurance was another. It's something that has a lot of bureaucracy and red tape to it, and that keeps first responders away. Because we deal enough with that at work, and to reach out and get help and try to do that is another issue. For me personally, I was a patrol officer. I was a patrol sergeant. I worked that for about half of my career, and the other half I was a major crimes detective and a major crimes sergeant. So I dealt with the worst of the homicides, the robberies, the sex crimes, the child abuse, just things that really took a piece of my heart every time I had to deal with those kind of cases. And to be in a trauma-based profession, what happens is that you're exposed to a lot of really dark things that you can't really share with your family, nor would you want to, or your friends or your neighbors. So when you come home, there's an isolation that begins to happen, and a separation in the families. And that's why you see a lot of trauma. It comes out in the family setting, because people are doing a great job. They're out there, they're serving, they're doing what they need to do, but things start to fall apart at home. And so the profession, the first responder profession, has a really high suicide rate, a really high divorce rate, and alcohol and other unhealthy mechanisms for coping or an issue in first responders. I was no stranger to that. I lost a couple marriages myself, and about 20 years into my career, my youngest son, he was 12 years old, and he was diagnosed with bone cancer. He had osteosarcoma. They had to amputate his leg, and we were in the hospital for about 200 days a year during that fight. And for me, there's a big thing happened during that journey, and faith was a big, really a big turning point for myself. But about 6 years after my son was diagnosed, he was 18, and he ended up committing suicide. The cancer had come back 3 times, and that poor little guy had just been through so much. And when he died, I was working that day, and I actually had to go to my own son's suicide call, basically. And it was time that I knew I needed to reach out. Mm-hmm. But I also found that by reaching out, there's something really important, and you have to have the right counseling there to be able to deal with the trauma and things that first responders go through. I brought my grief, but I also brought about 20 years worth of police work. And so there's a very select few counselors that can help and help an officer or a first responder in that position. So we basically, towards the end of my career, I thought about, the barriers that were there. I thought about why first responders weren't getting the help that they needed and the culture. And we came up with the At-Ease program. And I was on the Santa Barbara Police Foundation, and we started raising money for equipment and catastrophic things that may happen to families. But we shifted and started to raise money for behavioral health and counseling services for first responders. So out of that grew the 911 At-Ease International that we have today. It's been in existence for 7 years, the program has, and we started 911 At-Ease International last year just because of the demand. We started at the police department here in Santa Barbara. It grew. Before we knew it, we were serving the whole central coast of California and serving over 600 first responders a year.
Wow.
And then the demand just started to come across the country. So we're in several different places in the country right now.
So it's not just you're in Santa Barbara, people from other places can reach you. Are there chapters, or I don't know if I'm using the right words?
That's what we do now. We take what's worked here on the central coast of California, and through 911 At-Ease International, we start chapters up in different locations. So we're down in New Mexico around the Navajo Nation there. We're in Idaho. We're in Minneapolis area in Minnesota, which is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And several counties throughout California as well. And people can go to our website. It's 911 At-Ease International. It says 911aei.org. And you can see where we are and also put a request in to have a chapter built up in your area as well. So what happens is people see a need and they say, hey, we want this here. And so we just help to build a chapter.
Help them build it. So is it
the first responder?
Yeah. So are the people who are sort of starting the groups, if they want to bring it to their city or their community, are they law enforcement individuals or people in government, local government, who are usually doing it?
Well, we serve law enforcement. We serve firefighters. Mm-hmm. We serve paramedics. We also serve emergency room personnel, doctors, nurses, EMTs, and people on the COVID floor as well. We started serving them about six months before COVID hit. And then once it hit, we just, we saw the need of the service on the COVID floors and ICU. And those folks are really going through some very difficult situations right now. But we're here, and usually what we'll do is we'll get a program manager type of person, somebody that's interested. A first responder could be, doesn't have to be a first responder, but somebody who has a heart and is able to connect with first responder agencies. And then we also build up a clinical base, and we vet out the clinicians for that area that people can see a clinician.
Okay, that's great. So so it's not just any clinician. It's almost certifying them as being, having the proper skills to deal with your, first responders' unique challenges. No, this is really, really, really fantastic. I mean, I have personal experience with family members who are in this area, and I know how tough it is. Everything you just described. I mean, imagine. I can't imagine dealing with murder scenes. And you said the child, what crimes against children are things I can't even watch on TV. To be honest with you, those are tough, and yet you have to deal with those and others like you. Whether you're a police officer, or you're a paramedic, or whatever the case may be, and then you have to go home and have the same challenges we all have. That's got to be really tough. So I want to going a little bit in along the same lines as what you're talking about. I mean, these stresses that we just discussed that specifically police officers are facing, is certainly others, has always been there as far as seeing horrible crimes and things like that. We're now dealing in the last, at least 10 years, a situation where police are fairly demonized, right? I mean, I think unfairly. I think you would probably agree with that, very unfairly. And so they're now having to deal with this stigma where, as you said, when I was a kid, you saw a police officer and you wanted to be them, right? They marched in parades. They came to your school. It was exciting. Every kid, when asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was a police officer typically, right? And, nowadays it's viewed as something different. And I think personally it's unfair. And I base that on statistics, on numbers, not emotions, statistics. Tell me the effect of what has been going on in society in regards to the image of police officers and how that makes their job, your job, even more difficult.
Well, during the past year with the pandemic and since the death of George Floyd, there's just been an amazing amount of pressure that's put on this profession, even more than I ever experienced, I think, in the 31 years that I was there. The pandemic itself is something that you sign up and you're willing to lay your life down for another person when you do that, and that it's a possibility. But with the pandemic now, it brought in a new danger to our families as well. So when people go out and they serve, and we've had a lot of instances where somebody gets sick in the family and they may pass away, and there's just a lot of other stressors that are happening because a first responder is out there and serving, and you're exposed. I think it's always been a problem with body fluids and things like that on working in police departments. That's always been something that scared me, but this is even something that takes it to another level, I think, for those serving and their families. They have worries. But then when it comes to the civil unrest and the anti-police sentiment that's been out there, and the mainstream media's coverage of law enforcement, that definitely has an effect on those who serve, because they are doing a very difficult job. For 31 years, I worked with people of courage and character who did heroic, acts of valor all the time. It was happening all the time. Acts of compassion, acts of restraint. These things happen daily, and there's tens of thousands of these acts that are happening across America right now. But the mainstream media wants to take an isolated incident and use that to paint a broad brush over first responders and specifically police, and like you said, demonize them. It's a very noble profession. It still is to this day. And there's amazing people that are doing that job. So I have found that there's always 10% that never liked us. That number might be up a little bit higher right now, but there's always 90% of the population that is out there that does support the first responders. And so that's what I always look to. But it's not easy when you turn the TV on, or your family is afraid to say what you do for a living at a party, or what, not that we have a lot of parties anymore, but there's those things that happen where the stress is coming on law enforcement, and it's not good. It's not good at all.
So I wanted, since we're on this topic, I wanted to see if you wanted to or are interested in talking about some of the numbers as far as police shootings by in general by racial group and things like that, and put a perspective on it. I have some of that information. I'm okay if you don't want to get into that arena, that's fine, and we'll move on. But if that's something you want to talk about, I'd love to.
I know that every community is different. The statistics are going to be different in every community. So I'm not dialed in on exactly what the statistics are. Okay. I do know. So one statistic that's very interesting that came out of my own department when a lot of this media started was the use of force per incident. And they looked at the past, I think it was the past 5 years and police contacts with the public, and through, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of calls for service, only less than 0.25% of those contacts required the use of force. So that's pretty staggering when people hear that, and they think that you go out there every day you're in a gunfight. It's not every day, right. Or every day you get in a fight. It will happen, and there are people that resist, and you do have to overcome their resistance legally. But yeah, I think this. I'm happy to hear the statistic that you have as well.
Yeah. So, and maybe again, if you don't want to get in it, because I know some of this stuff can get political, and it's not meant to be. People can make up their own minds as far as what they think, but I like to look at facts and evidence. So, a couple of things that I think is worth noting, as far as police officers killed in the line of duty. This is just all police. It could be an accidental shooting. It could be any number of things, but it's, year over year, it's the same criteria. So in 2019, there were 135 police officers killed in the line of duty. And then in 2020, there were 264. So 135 versus 264, which is almost 100% increase, basically doubling of the amount of police officers killed. I think that's, that hopefully is eye-opening to people. We want it to be zero, of course, but in a large country where police carry a gun for a reason, they don't carry a gun because they're expecting to, meet up with a clown and have a party, right? In 2020, the number of shootings, not unarmed or armed, just total shootings by race, there were 432 white people. So police officers shot at a white person, again, unarmed, armed, everything. So 432 white, 226 black, and 156 Hispanic. If we look at unarmed shootings, the number in 2019, I struggled to find 2020 numbers. But in 2019, the number of unarmed black men killed by police was 14. It's actually 13 men, 1 woman. And the number of unarmed white men killed by police was 25. So 25 white, 14 black. And I want that number to be zero, right? You want that number to be zero. Police officers want that number to be zero. But unarmed doesn't mean walking down the street, holding their kid's hand, coming home from ice cream, right? These are, resisting arrest, conflicts, going for the police officer's gun, charging the officers, and so on and so forth. So these are, as a matter of fact, I looked into the 14 black shootings of unarmed black men. In 2 cases, I believe the police officer was in the wrong and was arrested. Every other case, it was very obvious a justified shooting. So with those numbers, I mean, what are your thoughts on those numbers? Are those numbers surprising to you? Do you think that the public knows those numbers, or do they think that there's thousands of unarmed black men being shot every year?
I think most people, when they do look at the actual numbers, it changes their view on what's really happening out there. And you can find those statistics. I'm sure that was a uniform crime reporting statistics. I think the FBI is the one that handles that. And what we do is that we have to report, use of force to that. We also have to report race involved in different things so that people can track that.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a tracking mechanism, and I don't think that those sound any different than really what I've experienced through my career. And I handled the officer involved shootings. I used to investigate those. I was in charge of the shootings, and there's a lot of different reasons that somebody may be shot if they're quote unarmed, and like you explained, it can be a violent attack. It could be a suspect that's overpowering an officer, and just they're afraid for their life. I mean, usually they have to articulate why it is that they were in fear of their life or the life of someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people don't understand sometimes why a cop can't just shoot a knife out of somebody's hand like they see on TV. And those things it's not realistic. Mm-hmm. And everything happens in a split second. And there's also different views that happen from the people who are involved as well. So we do have video cameras out there. They can be helpful, but they can also not show the whole picture. Mm-hmm. And there's different angles that everybody has to look at. When I was investigating officer involved shootings, you could have two officers that were standing right next to each other, and they would have a completely different perception of the incident. When the shots were fired, they'd have a different reason why it happened. And that, to me, that you knew that they hadn't talked. If you had people that were saying the exact same thing, then that could be a red flag. Right. So everybody's perception on what they see and the different things that happen, you have to take it all into account. And it takes an awful lot of work, and talking to all the witnesses and comparing it up to the evidence that's at the scene and the mindset of the folks that are involved. And so that, I know firsthand that a lot of work goes into investigating those type of uses of force, or any major use of force. Mm-hmm. For that.
Yeah. And that's what people want. I think that is 100% what we want. Nobody wants to say the police officer is always innocent. We want accountability and everything, especially when we're talking about lethal force. And by the way, I just want to make the point is I don't really care the color of the skin of the person. Personally, it doesn't matter to me. I only look at these statistics in order to make sort of the point that the media puts out there. As soon as there's a shooting, really the only thing they ever report is if it's a white officer and a black man. And again, I care about the life. I don't want them to be killed, period. But sometimes, obviously, it is something that has to happen, as we have seen. So anyways, thanks for commenting on that. Obviously, from your perspective is different than mine. Okay, so I want to just go on to just to kind of finish up here is to look at. So you also wrote a book called A Higher Call to Duty. Tell us about that book, and then tell us how my listeners can get a copy of that book.
Sure, it was a book that several people got together after I gave my testimony at a prayer breakfast one year, and they said, you need to write a book. And I said, no, I don't. But I ended up praying about it, and there's a book. The book talks a lot about just my personal journey. It's related a lot to the profession that I was in, law enforcement. So I talk about different cases that I was involved in. So there are a lot of interesting, exciting stories in there. But it also talks about the trauma that we just spoke of, and how that affected me personally and what it did in my life. To my whole family as well. Talks about the, just being a father, losing a child, and what I went through in that situation. I had another child that was involved in pretty bad drug habit. And I think most people think they're alone in those situations. And I wrote the book because I want to let them know that they're not, one, but two, that there's hope. And some of the hardest hits I ever took, I'm still standing, and we have a program now that's at 911 Addie's International that came out of a lot of hits that I personally took. But we can use our pain to either let the enemy drag us down, or to let it propel us into something else. And so I just wanted to share my experience with that. I don't tell anybody what to do ever, because people don't listen to you should, but they will listen to your story and take what they like from it and leave the rest. But it's put out there to really help people. And I think right now in the times that we're facing, people need to read something that has some hope for it. So hope in it. And so that's why I wrote that. You can find it on Amazon, or I also have a website. It's sergeantmikemcgrew.com. And so that's SGT Mike McGrew, McGrew.com.
Okay. And again, the title of the book is A Higher Call to Duty. So if you want to find it on Amazon, it's called A Higher Call to Duty by Sergeant Mike McGrew. And I think that this book and reading this book is probably very helpful to even spouses of first responders who, as you said, you go home and it's a whole family dynamic and things as well. Sergeant Mike McGrew, this has been really fantastic. I love what you're doing. I love it. I think it is extremely important for us to really pay attention to our first responders, police officers, fire, medical workers who are on the front lines and dealing with a lot of challenges, and they have to bring them home. Again, for those that are interested in finding out more about Sergeant McGrew's organization to help those that are struggling with their challenges at work, and as a first responder, you can go to 911aei.org. That's 911aei.org. And you can find out about it and even bring the group to your community, your group, and get the help that everyone needs. Sergeant McGrew, thanks so much for being here. This was really, really great, and I wish you all the best and your organization, because you're doing great work.
Thank you. It's my honor to be on air, and thanks for putting this out. Appreciate
Absolutely. It. Of course. So yes, again, please go to 911aei.org and take a look at A Higher Call of Duty. That's Sergeant McGrew's book, A Higher Call of Duty. You can find it on Amazon. And thank all of you for listening. Hopefully you learned a lot from this episode. If you are a first responder yourself, or you have a friend or family member who is, please ask them to listen to this, or at least get Sergeant McGrew's book and check out 911aei.org and see how his organization can help. So, thanks again for being here, all of you, and we'll see you next time.
So say